maybe they get a little bit more handsy in the negotiations.
It seems like one way to guarantee a record shutdown beyond 35 days is to not have a speaker around. If Kevin McCarthy gets fired, doesn't that increase the chances of a protracted shutdown?
It depends on his replacement. I mean, if you're talking about,
you're assuming there will be a replacement.
Well, that's it. Well, look, I think eventually there will be a replacement. I don't think we can go, for the next year and a half or year and months without a speaker. I mean, obviously,
you could go 35 days.
This isn't normal times, but again, we just aren't really. I presume that we'll have a speaker in the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. The question is, what is the mantra of the speaker that comes next? If it's Speaker McCarthy, if he's able to battle this off, I think he is going to say something. I'm going to be the adult in the room, like what Michelle was saying earlier, right. And we'll proceed on that path. If it's somebody like Representative Scalise, you may get a similar message. If it's somebody like Tom Emmer, well, maybe you're going to see a lot more confrontation, and maybe this shutdown in November goes into January. But again, from the market standpoint, thank gosh this is a shutdown and not a debt ceiling crisis.
Oh my God!
Because if we were talking about debt ceiling, this would be a lot different issue. Just that 35-day shutdown, you're talking about a $3 billion GDP hit in response to that. Obviously, that's not great. But that's not something like if we had seen like the turmoil in the fixed income markets.
Yeah, a far cry.
Can I just say also on the adult in the room piece, because this is very interesting that Kevin McCarthy is using this language now.
Right.
We've been using that phrase, and a lot of people have been using that phrase in response to the age issue. And of course, Biden posturing himself as the adult in the room ahead of the election next year. I'm the one that has the experience and the wisdom to get these things done. And now you see that coming up in a very different issue and by the opposite party. So that it's a very interesting turn of phrase to use at this point in time.
Boy, it sure is. You also wonder, and this is a big speculative conversation, so forgive me, but we don't know what's going to happen in the next hour here. Nathan, if Kevin McCarthy was ousted, replaced, the next speaker is not going to touch anything that involves Democrats. Doesn't that increase division and partisanship potentially in the House?
I think absolutely. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about a scale of 1 to 10, partisanship's already at 15.
Yes.
But, you have an impeachment inquiry going on. But there are a lot of bills that, I won't call them exciting bills, but, we've talked about crypto before on this show. Representative McHenry wants a vote on his crypto bill. Mm-hmm. If he wants that passed, he needs the Senate to do it. And so, yes, you can see partisanship, but eventually you're going to get to a point where legislation is just not going to pass, and there are bills out there people want to work on. So I think you'll have like maybe a month or two of, partisanship, and then, the normal will begin to start creeping back in again and so forth. This is my optimistic take here. And so, I think, for the first half of next year, if you get a new speaker, maybe we'll have a little bit of normal order, if you call it that, but then before the presidential election season.
Has the White House decided, or the DNC for that matter, the DCCC, about what's best for an election a year from now? Is there a Machiavellian scenario where they're girding for Kevin McCarthy to get fired, set the place on fire for the next year, watch how Republicans handle the House, take it back in November?
I mean, I think, publicly, they won't say this.
No one's saying that on a
privately,
microphone.
It certainly seems like, they would want someone that they can deal with.
Yeah.
I think, of course.
That's different than showing chaos on purpose, though, to win back the House.
Well, and I think they can and already have made the argument that, this chaos, they're not owning it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that's going on in the Republican Party that maybe that party needs to sort out themselves, and that's certainly the White House position. I think heading into an election year, they'll probably continue to try to take advantage of that as they're the ones causing trouble. Yeah. We're the ones trying to get stuff done. And, McCarthy, in the end, as now, probably is their best vehicle to get that done as we're talking about what the alternatives are.
It's not going to get easier.
Right.
That's another way of looking at this that you don't hear a lot of people talk about. It is, to an extent, the devil you know, isn't it, Nathan?
Absolutely. I mean, if, with Speaker McCarthy, they've gotten somebody that they could have worked with before. I mean, like I said, debt ceiling got fixed. But you also saw a lot of statements this morning from Democratic members saying, look, if we do a deal with him, tomorrow he's going to be trying to oust us. Right. And we have seen things like, I can't remember which representative said it, but they turned the NDAA political.
Yes.
That's something that, they are remembering right now. But if Speaker McCarthy goes and you get somebody else, you may be dealing with somebody a little more difficult to work with.
Underscoring the level of unknown here. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence. Michelle Jamrisco, Bloomberg News, White House senior reporter. Many thanks for the insights. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Lows of the day right now for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Right to the numbers here with the S&P down 70 points, a drop of 1.6%. The Dow now down 500 points, down 1.5%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 280, a drop there of 2.1%. The Dow, by the way, now at 32,930. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.79% with the 2-year at 5.13%. Gold down $4 the ounce to $18.24, down by about 0.2%, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 0.5%, $89.27 a barrel. Stocks are slumping while the retreat in Treasury is extended after jobs data bolster the case for the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates elevated. Again, we've got the 10-year at 4.79%. Losses for stocks with the S&P down 70, a drop now of 1.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We've got eyes on the House floor where things are slowing down on purpose. It appears not all Democratic lawmakers are available. And so we've got a little bit of gamesmanship here in trying to slow things down for an actual vote. If you're with us on YouTube, and I do invite you to join, we've got our cameras on here in the studio and a camera on the House floor. Search Bloomberg Global News, click play, and you'll see what I'm seeing right now. There's Matt Gaetz as we speak. He's in the well, along with a lot of other lawmakers milling around, including Catherine Clark of the Democratic leadership. We'll keep an eye on the floor here and an ear on the floor as we stand by for, well, frankly, anything. Now that the motion to vacate has been filed by Matt Gaetz, that happened late yesterday, there's going to be a series of procedural votes here. We've been seeing that go through the process here since we took air about an hour and a half ago. There's going to be a motion to table in which this could be killed, and then that would set up a potential motion to vacate, and that could happen any time in the next 2 days. But all reports indicate that that would be today, assuming we get that far. And a lot of other reports say that Kevin McCarthy, it's really unknown right now, but Kevin McCarthy, frankly, may not have the votes to survive this. Democrats do not have his back. The most important development today since that motion was filed, everyone was looking to Hakeem Jeffries. And when he came out of a Democratic caucus meeting this morning, it was unclear exactly where he was going, but pretty clear Democrats did not have Kevin McCarthy's back. Here's how he put it.
We encourage our Republican colleagues who claim to be more traditional to break from the extremists. In the chaos, in the dysfunction, in the extremism, we are ready, willing, and able to work together with our Republican colleagues, but it is on them to join us to move the Congress and the country forward.
That was followed by a statement, importantly. I'll read it to you, quote, given their unwillingness to break from MAGA extremism in an authentic and comprehensive manner. Hakeem Jeffries writes House Democratic leadership will vote yes on the pending Republican motion to vacate the chair. Nancy Pelosi followed with a statement of her own. Simply, the Speaker of the House is chosen by the majority party. I'm glad to say that we have lined up some important voices to help us through this. We were planning to speak with, as I mentioned, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan. The Democrat from Pennsylvania is on the floor right now as part of this process. We hope that we will connect with her, but this is the game that we're in today. This is minute by minute. Even Kevin McCarthy actually doesn't know how this is going to end later on, and I'm glad to say that we do have Maura Gillespie with us, the founder of Blue Stack Strategies, former advisor to Speaker John Boehner and Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Maura, it's great to see you as we meet here, apparently on an historic day. Do you think Kevin McCarthy has the votes to survive, or is this the end?
It's going to be an interesting next few minutes here. I mean, the fact that Pelosi is not here to vote to oust McCarthy, which I think is kind of an interesting take here, that she's missing votes. I just saw online that she's, racing back from the airport, but doesn't look like she's going to make it. So it's certainly something that, is part of this issue, right? Not all members are there to vote. And so this becomes a numbers game for Kevin McCarthy. It really does come down to the numbers and how he can survive the 5 that have said that they're not going to vote for him or they're going to vote to oust him. So it's going to be a numbers game for Kevin McCarthy, but he has obviously seen that before as we played that game in January. And it's unfortunate, though, because there's so much work that needs to get done. And I know that's been repeated, but here we are again. And it's no wonder that the American people are wondering what Congress actually does.
You could make the argument, Maura, that no matter what happens today, whether McCarthy's ousted or whether his job is preserved, that this could make budget negotiations even more difficult as we walk into November and another potential shutdown. How do you see it?
Well, it does, because what Kevin McCarthy did over the weekend, like him or not, trust him or not, he got the job done and kept our government open, because a government shutdown would have just been handing it to the Democrats with every right to be, lamenting what Republicans failed to do, which is the job that is House of Representatives. You have to you have to fund the government. And so Kevin McCarthy did what he had to do this weekend and shocked a lot of people, probably myself included, that it got done. And then on the flip side, so going in with all that momentum and having, you know, the best case scenario, okay, let's work together. Let's put it on the Senate. Matt Gaetz comes in and kind of just throws a bomb in all of it. And now whatever leverage was had is completely gone, because this just shows that they are not doing the job that they've been elected to do. They're not actually working on the bills they're supposed to be working on. Instead, they're having this chaos, and doesn't look like they're able to govern, unfortunately.
It's entirely possible, we understand, that Nancy Pelosi may not make this vote. It's not a long ride from the airport, but I can assure you the traffic today is miserable. I want to ask you about your experience, though, with Speaker Boehner, who knew about a motion to vacate. I believe it was Congressman Meadows who brought that to the floor. It wasn't privileged, and it was never voted on. But you were part of that office when that feeling was in the air. What's happening inside the Speaker's office today?
It's very stressful. It's also very frustrating because people are just trying to do their jobs and fight the bigger, fight. And what this in-house fighting, this in-conference fighting is super frustrating, especially because it's done publicly. You want to keep your fights in the family. That's what both sides want to try and do as much as possible. But when you have someone like a Matt Gaetz who is really just thinking about himself and only himself, that's almost impossible to deal with. And again, Matt Gaetz is loving this moment because he's getting this attention, and he loves that there's only a 5-seat majority. He needs that over Kevin McCarthy. That's how he's holding the whole conference hostage. So for me, I remember, obviously, I have certain feelings about Mark Meadows because I do, again, you see right through it. You see that it's a detention-seeking effort. It's to appease a small portion of what they think is their base. Mark Meadows, again, if anyone read John Boehner's book, came groveling in, crying on his knees. And that just should tell you everything about what they're really doing on the public-facing aspect and then what they are saying behind closed doors. I don't think there's any love lost between Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy. But again, this is just Matt Gaetz trying to, suck up all the oxygen and get in front of the cameras. And in that sense, he's succeeding. But in doing the job that he was elected to do, he is miserably failing.
Wow. Think of the scene that Maura Gillespie just described for us. So that's another way of saying as well, relationships are being redefined, lines are being drawn. If Kevin McCarthy survives this, what happens to somebody like Matt Gaetz?
He'll continue to, unfortunately for us, for the Republican Party, he's going to continue to do this. He's going to bring up this motion to vacate because he has the ability to do so within the rules that were set in January. And to continue to fundraise off of it, which is the end of the day, that's really what he is doing. He's been fundraising off of it. And this weekend he did a media blitz on the Sunday shows and fundraised off of that. So he's just campaigning off of it, partially to build up his own profile, his own brand, but also to account for any impending legal bills that will be coming his way when he has this ethics complaint or ethics investigation that's been renewed. And he'll need to kind of account for that. So it's unfortunately, the relationship's not going to repair itself. This is more just about the prerogatives of Matt Gaetz versus Kevin McCarthy. And I will also point out, Democrats, it was a different situation when it was John Boehner as Speaker, or even when it was Paul Ryan as Speaker. But when John Boehner was Speaker, there was a level of respect and appreciation. They may not have agreed with his policies, obviously, the Democrats did not, but they respected that John Boehner would get the job done and do what was in the best interest of the whole House. And I would just say that there's a handful of Democrats, if not all, who don't have that same faith and confidence in a Kevin McCarthy.
Boy, that's something else. It looks like this vote is being delayed here. It's interesting that Matt Gaetz needs 5 votes, right? And there are 5 Democrats missing. So this actually could be put on the table for a moment, and we'll let you know how that goes. Just another reminder, Maura, of how thin this margin is.
Right. Yeah, and we saw that, in 2015 when it was brought up, there was a funeral happening in New York, and so the numbers were different because there were a handful of members of the New York delegation, both Republicans and Democrats, that were up in New York, and so they weren't available for the vote. So the number game is really important, especially when you have a thin majority, as Kevin McCarthy does in the Republican conference. But again, what's so frustrating too, and I'm sure it's frustrating for people at home going, what is happening? Why can't they just do their jobs? You have
Yeah,
Matt
right.
Gaetz, and people have asked him, "What's your plan here? What's the plan?" And there isn't one, right? He is going into this knowing that there isn't a plan for if he were to succeed. He has no idea what would happen next, and that's what's scary to me. Is you have people in Congress who don't actually want Congress to work. That's a problem, and people should be really alarmed by that.
Maura, thank you. Maura Gillespie, it's great to have you back. A Republican strategist, founder of BlueStack Strategies, worked with Speaker John Boehner and Congressman Adam Kinzinger. If we can bring us back to the floor here, guys, we do have the motion to table. This is the moment we have been waiting for. As I've been discussing delays, it is now beginning. And we're going to keep tabs on this roll call as it takes place. This would be an opportunity to kill that motion to vacate. If they get through this vote, then it's on potentially to the real thing. So stay with us here on Bloomberg. As we turn to world and national news now, Nancy Lyons has that in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Joe. Well, the House is bracing for that vote on whether to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. Republican Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz put forward the motion to vacate the chair yesterday. Gaetz is angry that McCarthy worked with Democrats to pass a short-term funding bill to keep the government open. Well, ahead of today's vote, Democrats were lining up to denounce the Speaker, including Congressman Adam Schiff.
Kevin McCarthy's not trustworthy. We don't trust him. Their own conference doesn't trust him. We've just lurched from crisis to crisis with him as Speaker, and they need to choose someone that has the ability to govern, because it's not him.
Schiff calls McCarthy untrustworthy. Democrats are not expected to vote to keep the Speaker. McCarthy can only survive if nearly every Republican votes to keep him. Former President Donald Trump is back in a Manhattan courtroom for day 2 of his civil fraud trial. Trump calls it a witch hunt and a move to try and keep him from being president. He blasted the proceedings while heading into court today and said the judge was given inaccurate information on his assets.
He's been given false information, misleading information, and corrupt information by a very corrupt and incompetent Attorney General.
Attorney General Letitia James is accusing Trump of inflating his net worth. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, and Wall Street is continuing to monitor developments on Capitol Hill. Keep it locked in to Bloomberg Radio for the latest on House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's vote. We've got you covered here on Sound On and throughout the afternoon on Bloomberg Business Week. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ are all declining. We're seeing a slight emphasis on slight bounce off the bottom for the S&P 500 index right now, down 63 points, a drop right now of 1.5% with the S&P at 4225. The Dow down 464 points at 32,969 for the Dow. That too is a drop of 1.4%. NASDAQ down 257 points, a decline of 1.9%. The 10-year yield 4.79%, with the 2-year now yielding 5.13%. Spot gold down $3.50 the ounce to $18.24, down by about 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil 89.37 a barrel. WTI up by about 0.6%. A top Fed official says central bankers should maintain high rates for a long time to quash inflation. And with more, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Giudice.
The president of the Atlanta Fed, Raphael Bostic, is a warning. Cutting U.S. interest rates too soon would prevent the Fed from pushing inflation back to its 2% target. Bostic says that's not negotiable, and Fed officials can afford to be patient. They've been tightening since early 2022, and futures imply one more rate hike this year. Vinny Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Sources tell Bloomberg United Airlines is poised to announce an agreement to buy a double-digit number of Airbus A321 narrow-body jets, and an order could come as soon as today. UAL down 2.5%, along with other airlines. We've got the ADRs of Airbus. They're down 0.5%. Boeing shares, though, they're up by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Little play-by-play on the House floor here. It does appear the motion to table the motion to vacate is going to fail. That means this is still alive, and we will likely see this vote take place. If you're with us on YouTube, you see the floor. Here on the radio, you can hear it. 10 Republican no's so far. Would indicate here the vote is not done, but would indicate that the motion to table this resolution is going to fail. We want to bring you straight to Capitol Hill right now for Zach Cohen, a Bloomberg government Congress reporter who's been covering this firsthand and put his pad and pen down for us for a moment here. Zach, it's good to see you. Are we expecting then a vote on the actual motion to vacate will follow?
There's some flexibility here on exactly what would happen next, but this does need to be decided in, I believe, in the next 2 days. You know, Congress can do fun things like extend a legislative day past midnight into the next day if they really wanted to drag this out. So it's unclear. This is really uncharted territory. The last time there was even a motion to vacate the chair, an effort to oust the speaker, was in 1910. It's been more than a century since we've seen anything like this happen, and it's never been successful. Now, there have been efforts to oust former House speakers, and even just the threat of that has been successful as part of the reason why John Boehner is no longer Speaker of the House, for instance. So the fact that you've got 10 Republicans that are now voting, at least procedurally, to oust Kevin McCarthy and moving toward a final vote to vacate the chair is really extraordinary.
Apparently, Democrats have a bit of an attendance issue. Nancy Pelosi will not be there. We were supposed to talk earlier with Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan. She's on the floor trying to manage all of this for Democrats. Does the attendance, does the Democratic quorum change the outcome of this vote, or we're done here?
It could. It depends on how many are absent. I believe there were 5 on a previous unrelated procedural vote that were absent. So the question now becomes, do they make their way to the floor in time? It sounds like Congresswoman Amelia Sykes, for instance, from Ohio, is on her way. Maybe former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi gets there from the airport in time after being in California for the delivery of the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's remains to San Francisco over the weekend. And the key question here is obviously not how they will vote. Democrats have decided that they're going to vote in favor of this motion to oust McCarthy from the speakership, obviously being not fans of how he has run the House over the last 9 months and change. The question becomes, if there are fewer Democrats in attendance, that actually lowers the threshold that McCarthy would need in order to retain the speakership. Remember, it's only a majority of those present and voting. And so if there are Democrats absent, that makes it easier for McCarthy to get over the finish line, even if he's losing members of his own party.
Some of the votes, the Republican votes against tabling the motion include Davidson, Crane, Buck, Sparks, Biggs, Rosendale, Gates, not a shocker, and Bob Good. Are any of these names a surprise to you, Zach?
And some of these are moving targets. I believe, I think Davidson had already changed his vote, and so when the gavel comes down, that'll be the final record. But a lot of these folks are those that have been opposing Kevin McCarthy, especially on procedural matters, for basically since he took the gavel or voted against him during the week-long balloting over the speakership that folks will remember from January. And so some of these folks have had concerns about McCarthy for a long time, and this is just an extension of that. And obviously, Gates has been the front man for this effort at being the one to bring this motion to vacate the chair to the House floor. But it does seem that there's at least 9 other Republicans that are backing him at least now, and we'll see how the next couple of hours go. There's a couple of interesting people like Nancy Mace that I think would be worth keeping an eye on as well.
Yes, absolutely. We had an interesting conversation with Congressman Ben Cline earlier in the broadcast, Zach, of course, Freedom Caucus member. He voted for Kevin McCarthy as Speaker and has been seen as an ally, even as a member of the Freedom Caucus, but he would not tell me, and I asked him a lot of times, what he would plan to vote today if the motion to vacate actually came before him. How many members of the Republican conference are making up their mind in real time today?
I mean, there were closed-door meetings with both Republicans and Democrats just this morning that we were staking out, and it was really the last opportunity for McCarthy for Republicans and Jeffries for the Democrats to sort of whip their folks into line. You'll notice this is a largely party line affair with the exception of these 10 or so Republicans that are voting against McCarthy at the moment. And so I think a lot of members of Congress are interested in maintaining the party line where possible. If you're going to break with that, it has real ramifications, not just politically, but under the dome. If you're opposed to Republican leadership or any leadership of any party, it tends to have ramifications for the rest of how you do your job. So folks are not quite ready to jump on that unless they're really willing to. I guess what's the saying? If you aim for the king, best not miss. And I think that's probably the thought factor here.
Boy, how true. How about the irony of Nancy Pelosi, who encouraged Democrats to vote to oust or at least not defend Kevin McCarthy, is not able to make this vote. She got tied up at the airport, I guess, Zach.
Yeah, that's right. She was in California escorting the remains of the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, her dear friend from San Francisco, fellow California Democrat, and appears to have been making her way back to Washington. And it sounds like the House is actually now voting on considering removing Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. That first procedural vote was successful. And so this is a rather historic moment we're seeing on the House floor. And obviously, Pelosi and McCarthy have been antagonists for a long time. Pelosi was Speaker while Kevin McCarthy was Minority Leader. And we're often at loggerheads on any number of important policy issues.
Zach Cohen, thank you so much. I appreciate your stopping down. I know how busy things are up there. I want to bring our listeners and viewers back to the floor now. Let's put an ear on what's happening as this motion to table has failed. Sounds like a bit of a moment of silence. They didn't see me coming. We just heard from Matt Gaetz, the congressman from Florida, speaking.
Recognized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like so many others, I deeply regret that we are here in what was a totally avoidable situation. I must take you back to January, however, which for many of us was about not repeating the failures of the past and letting Republican voters across the country down once again, when in the past, for many years, when Republicans have had majorities in this chamber, we have passed our major spending bills predominantly with Democrat votes, something the other side of the House has never and would never do with majority control. Back in January, I expressed my concern that the previous 2 years during my first term here in this House, we had not used every tool at our disposal to fight against the harmful, radical Democrat agenda that is destroying the country, bankrupting the country, and under which the American people are suffering. But most in here wouldn't know that I helped persuade my 5 colleagues who comprised the remaining resistance in the wee morning hours of January 7 to switch our votes to present to let Mr. McCarthy become Speaker. And I went to him on this very floor to tell him that he was finally going to become Speaker on the next vote. In that moment, it was clear to me that I or we could have asked for anything in exchange for switching our votes to present, but I and we asked for nothing. The very next week, I requested and had a meeting with Speaker McCarthy to tell him he had my full support and that I wanted him to be successful because the country needed him to be successful. In the ensuing months, I helped him narrowly pass the Parents' Bill of Rights and the Limit Save Grow bill. I think both of those by just 1 or 2 votes, helping persuade some of my most conservative colleagues to come along despite some of the concerns they had with those bills. And we remained united as a conference through the Limit Save Grow vote as we passed a bill that was cutting spending to pre-COVID levels for non-defense discretionary spending, or just over $100 billion, historic spending cuts, as the Speaker had committed to do in January, and it also included a host of other conservative fiscal reforms. Unfortunately, however, that unity and that commitment to significant year 1 cuts and spending reforms were discarded in the Failed Responsibility Act, as I call it, which passed overwhelmingly, once again, with a majority of Democrat votes, validating the concern many of us had in January. Many of us had begged the Speaker, pleaded with the Speaker repeatedly to utilize the debt ceiling to leverage spending cuts and reforms. But instead, he negotiated an unlimited increase to the debt ceiling through January of 25, as much as we can come together and gleefully spend through January of 25, with no significant wins for the American people in that FRA, or Failed Responsibility Act. But the Speaker then said that we would use appropriations. We would use appropriations to bring the fight and finally reduce our spending. He said the levels of the FRA were the ceiling and not the floor, and recommitted multiple times to go back to the $1.471 trillion that was the Limit Save Grow levels.
Connection lost.
Radically, historically, saving $100 billion and lowering the deficit this year under Republican majority from $2.2 trillion to $2.1 trillion. That's what we were asking the Republican House to do, to go to $2.1 trillion. Meanwhile, the Speaker had committed to bring a balanced budget vote to this floor, something that still has not happened, despite the work that's been done in our Budget Committee to mark it up and have it ready to come to the floor. He also promised that we would bring all 12 appropriation bills well before the September 30 fiscal deadline. We did not. We simply, as Republicans, needed the Speaker to cast the vision, request the support of the entire conference, all of whom voted for the Limit Save Grow levels, except for 4 who wanted to go even further, to lead us in joining him, sticking with him, supporting him, and sending the most conservative spending bills with the most conservative cuts possible to the Senate as the best starting position for negotiations with the Senate. Many of us begged and pleaded with the Speaker to do that over the past 5 months. When the Speaker failed us to pass our spending bills, bringing only 1 of 12 to the floor before the August district work period, members began to negotiate amongst themselves without the Speaker to find compromise. I was among those who reluctantly agreed last month to split the difference between failed responsibilities 1.586 and the Limit Save Grow 1.471. I reluctantly agreed to do that, to go to 1.526 in order to pass our bills on to the Senate. We then essentially forced the Speaker, with the pressure of the calendar, the debt ceiling, or excuse me, the shutdown threat of the calendar, to bring those 4 bills to the floor last week, all of which I voted for, despite some of them not cutting the levels we'd agreed to and other concerns I had with the bills. I reluctantly voted for the 30-day conditional CR, or continuing resolution, because it cut an additional $10 billion in the month of October, going back to the pre-COVID 1.471 levels for defense, non-defense discretionary, 30%, and 0.471 levels for defense, non-defense discretionary, 30%, and it had border security. I voted for that. However, when that vote failed, the Speaker this past Friday in the Republican conference meeting made it abundantly clear that he was willing to do anything to avoid the temporary discomfort and the pressure of a pause in the 15% of the non-essential federal government operations, which would guarantee that we would lose to the Senate Democrats and the White House. If you're not willing to say no, then you're guaranteed to lose. And that was confirmed with the passage of the unconditional 45-day CR this past Saturday, once again with 209 Democrat votes. The Republican bill, 209-1 Democrats, 51-0 in the Senate side. The Speaker fought through 15 votes in January to become Speaker, but was only willing to fight through one failed CR before surrendering to the Democrats on Saturday. We need a Speaker who will fight for something, anything, besides just staying or becoming Speaker. If there was ever a time to fight, with $33 trillion in national debt, a $2 trillion deficit this year, 40-year high inflation, 20-year high interest rates, a downgraded credit rating, and for the first time in modern history, the polls showing, despite all the help of the media blaming Republicans in the House, the polls showed that the public was blaming Biden and the Democrats for an imminent shutdown. If not fight now, when would we fight? Now is and was the time. With the Democrats driving the fiscal bus off the cliff at 100 miles an hour, we cannot simply be content to be the party that slows it down to 95 just so we can sit in the front seat and wear the captain's hat. Our current debt and our spending trajectory is unsustainable. We need a Speaker, ideally somebody who doesn't want to be Speaker and hasn't pursued that at all costs for his entire adult life, who will meet the moment and do everything possible to fight for the country. A red line was crossed for me, I regret, on Saturday, and chose regret that I must vote against the motion to table as I did and to vote to vacate the chair. And I yield back.
I reserve. Gentleman from Florida reserves his time. Gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I share one thing in common with my friend from Virginia. This is a very sad day, and certainly a day I never expected to have to live through. You know, I think broadly speaking, as I look across this floor, you can divide members into three groups. I'm very happy to be in the first group. The overwhelming majority of my party supports the Speaker that we elected. We're proud of the leadership he's shown. We're proud of the manner in which he's been willing to work with everybody in our conference and, I believe, in this chamber. There's a second group.
This is Congressman Tom Cole speaking for McCarthy, live sound on the House floor.
Plunge this body into chaos and this country into uncertainty for reasons that only they really understand. I certainly don't. And then there are friends on the other side. I mean friends, honestly, with great sincerity. I have a lot of friends over there. And I recognize that my friends on the other side have a very complex set of partisan, personal, and political calculations to make. And I certainly wouldn't presume to give them any advice about that. But I would say, think long and hard before you plunge us into chaos, because that's where we're headed if we vacate the speakership. You know, I personally think there's really three reasons why we've come to this point. That's because at each three of these critical minutes, the Speaker did the right thing. First, there was a Speaker vote. You know, he got 85% of the vote in our conference, 90% of the vote from Republicans on this floor. Yet we had a small group that decided, no, they would dictate what they want. He didn't let that happen. He fought. Now, he fought for himself, but he fought for 90% of us, too, that wanted him to be the Speaker, and I appreciate that. Then, of course, we had the debt ceiling deal. Nobody here thought he could pass a bill. Nobody in America thought he could pass a bill. He did what speakers are supposed to do. He passed the bill. Then he sat down and negotiated with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president and came back with a good deal, a deal that will limit spending. He did the right thing. Finally, last Saturday on this floor, we were on the verge of a government shutdown.
That's Congressman Tom Cole, the Republican from Oklahoma who chairs the House Rules Committee, speaking live on the House floor after we witnessed the vote here on the motion to table. And breaking news this hour, Kevin McCarthy has lost that important test vote. We will now move on to a motion to vacate before midnight tomorrow. It could happen at any time when Kevin McCarthy decides to call for that vote. We have learned that the rebels, as I read on the terminal, do have the votes to oust him as speaker. The first time in 100 years we've seen a motion to vacate. This time might be different in that it may well pass. We want to send things to New York now. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. I appreciate you walking through all of this with me today. Carol Massar and Simone Foxman standing by in New York for Bloomberg Business Week. Guys, this has been a remarkable afternoon in Washington.
No doubt about it. And this is a critical vote. And we will find out what ultimately is, Joe, the future of the U.S. House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. As you said, though, it does not look good at this moment. We're going to continue to monitor what is going on the House floor as they consider removing McCarthy and ultimately see where that leads in terms of do we get a new House Speaker and what that means for policy, or whether or not somehow Kevin McCarthy is able to woo more to his side and maintain his position. It is a critical day, once again, when it comes to U.S. politics. All right, we are live in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube and, of course, Bloomberg Originals live here at Bloomberg headquarters. Carol Massar along with Simone Foxman. We know Joe and the team continuing to track this. They'll come back later at 5 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television, certainly to continue the coverage. Tuesday, October 3rd, and I feel like, Simone, there are a lot of critical things going on, least of which is not certainly, some of the turmoil we're once again seeing in the U.S. financial markets.
Yeah, certainly stocks down today. Definitely a lot of red on the screen. Not only do we have this massive question mark in Washington, we have a question mark about what the Fed is going to do as well, with various Fed commentary coming out that sometimes seems like it's at odds, certainly at odds with each other, as well as at odds with what the strategists on Wall Street are saying.
Yeah, it's the back and forth, but it certainly feels like that higher for longer now. We're all trying to figure out what longer means. So we're going to talk about that, focus on the crypto world as well. As you know, jury selection beginning in the fraud trial of once crypto king Samuel Bankman-Fried. We will take you live to downtown New York where all of that is happening. Going to speak about trends this year, last few years, the growing role of private credit. We've got a great voice on that, Ken Kinsell of Churchill Asset Management. I'm curious to Simone to see what he has to say about some of the wrangling that's going on in D.C., if at all he thinks about that when he thinks about his world of private credit.
Yeah, averted the shutdown, but now what? This question almost seems to loom just as large. We'll also talk about the growing competition for Tesla.
Yeah.
BYD, anyone?
Yeah, exactly. This is a big automaker over in China, so we're going to get to that. We've also got a great author on. She's a professor at Harvard Business School. We're going to talk about moving fast and fix things. Sounds like we could use that in this environment. Right now, over to our TV colleagues. We've got a lot to talk about when it comes to the financial markets. Countdown to the close starts now.
Countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld, joined right now by our colleagues Carol Massar, Simone Foxman filling in for Tim Stenovic today. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio, our originals, and our partnership with YouTube. Stocks at session lows, Carol Massar.
Yeah.
But before we get to the markets, I think we have to go back to what's going on in Washington right now. A procedural vote today here that would effectively set up a scenario to remove the Speaker of the House on a procedural measure that hasn't been successfully invoked since 1910. A Speaker who just came to power this year.
Right.
In
January.
January.
Just came to power.
January of this year.
Yeah.
And it looks like here in October, this could potentially be the end.
Yeah, it came to power, but, it wasn't like the Republicans were all in on him, right? He came and he seemed to have given away a lot in order to get that position. And having said that, here we are and the year isn't over and that job is certainly in question. What's interesting, Katie, is that balance of power in Washington, whatever the outcome of all of this, is dramatically going to shift. And we are living in an era, whether it's the Treasury market, whether it's climate change, so many things are dramatically shifting under us, and certainly front and center is politics.
Do you think this is going to affect the markets, though? because we always sort of talk about this idea that politics doesn't necessarily move the market, at least in the way that we talk about it in media. This is the Speaker of the House who has, at least right now, no viable successor that would be, you know, I guess, any more competent than he is here. And at a time where we haven't passed a budget, we got 45 days before we get to a new one, and we could potentially be trying to do this with a completely different speaker.
Right, so shut down. And I also think about what the world looks at in terms of we are supposed to be the government and the country where things are expected. It's not the unusual. We can count in on it. And then we continue to see upheavals in our government. And that's gotta, I think about our allies and how they look at us.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, McCarthy giving away to some degree a little bit of power when he became the speaker back, 9-10 months ago, and then maybe giving away a little bit of his leverage to the Democrats.
Well, not a little bit. He gave it away. I mean, he basically compromised and said, one vote, that's all it takes. One guy to stand up and say, I want this guy gone, and well, that's what happened. We knew this was going to happen.
But he could come back now and give that same leverage back to the Democrats. That's certainly what seems like a potential
Democrats are hanging him out to dry. Hakeem Jeffries already out with the statement saying the Democrats are not going to support.
But that's politics.
We got some time,
but
right?
That's
we got some
politics.
time,
And
yeah.
I'm curious to see where the wrangling goes here.
The wrangling goes?
The horse trading, if you will.
The horse trading.
That kind of does happen in politics.
When's the next downgrade, Carol Massar?
When's the next round for the United States? I don't know. What I'm trying to figure out is, man, the debate that I think continues, the Fed members are so clear in higher rates for longer. We get it. And then you have State Street coming out and said, yeah, we're thinking maybe a full percentage point of cuts next year, maybe even 200 basis points. That is interesting to me.
It is interesting. And you think about what would actually prompt it, and I fail to think of it other than a recession. You talk about 200 basis points of rate cuts, 100 basis points, maybe that's normalization back to neutral.
They talk about slowing in growth and inflation.
Exactly.
That
so
brings
there
it
you
about.
go.
Yeah, I mean, look, look, you want to go back to the markets. There's a reason why you see the NASDAQ down a couple of percentage points on the day and the S&P down 1.5% here. This isn't because good times are coming, is it?
You know, but we say higher for longer. But then when you read through some of the commentary that we've heard from Loretta Mester and Raphael Bostic today, both of them not voting members, you know, Mester was saying it's not appropriate to hold rates where they currently are until you get to 2%. But meanwhile, Bostic came out with a bit more of a let's hold them until we get back to that 2% level. Are Fed officials really as in agreement as we have seemed to think they are?
No, they're not in agreement. I mean, I know they put on a happy face every time they come out and say, oh, this was unanimous. But I think that could change dramatically when we get to the meeting at the end of this month, October 31st, November 1st here. And maybe you'll start to see a little bit more dissent here. But the fact of the matter is the pace of this economy and the direction of it is probably just as much of a conundrum to them as it is to us.
Jolts, anybody?
Jolts. Job openings, Carol Massar. There are 9 million of them out there, and only half of them are ghost jobs.
I mean, exactly. Well, that's the problem, right?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. There's one more. Apparently, the Speaker of the House is looking to hire someone. 200 grand salary, not bad.
Oh, too soon, Romaine Bostic. All right, we're going to come back in less than, a little bit. Okay. We're going to come back in less than an hour.
I didn't know you were a big McCarthy fan.
I'm not, but I would like to see them actually govern and work on policy rather than
that's sweet.
infighting. I know, right? I know. So sweet. All right, we're going to be back in less than an hour. So I
love Carol. She's such an optimist.
I try. We'll see you on radio, TV, YouTube, and of course, Bloomberg Originals. And we'll be back, 4 p.m. Wall Street time. A lot of cycles on Wall Street, has seen different trends on Wall Street, has seen different cycles in our government, and has to make sense of it. He has a front seat to what has been going on when it comes to private credit and private lending. So delighted to have back with us Ken Kinsell, President and CEO of Churchill Asset Management, $47 billion private capital affiliate of Nuveen. Nuveen, you know, the more than $1 trillion asset manager of the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association of America. Ken is joining us on Zoom from the Greenwich Economic Forum in Greenwich, Connecticut. Ken, so great to have you back with us. How are you?
Great to speak with you again, Carol, and always enjoy our conversation.
I do too. I feel like I always learn a lot. You give me some great perspective. You give our listeners and viewers great perspective. So what we were talking about with our TV colleagues is how much does an investment professional like you and your investors, how much do they care about dysfunction, lack thereof, a House Speaker maybe being voted out in Washington?
Well, certainly uncertainty is generally not a good thing, and certainly we've had a lot of that over the last year. The current environment that we've been, living through has, certainly created a very challenging dynamic overall. And of course, the banking turmoil in the spring, and of course now some of the dynamics playing out in Washington. But I would say that out of those dynamics has come one of the most attractive opportunities that I've certainly seen in my career in direct lending, in private credit. So I guess in that sense, I never wanted to wish for dysfunction and uncertainty, but I will say that in many respects, private credit and direct lending, unlike the GFC, Carol, has been here, if you will, to kind of come to the rescue a bit by providing financing capital and lending capital and ultimately growth capital to the companies that need that capital and have done and have performed well through the current environment. So in that sense, we're super busy and hoping that if things settle down a bit, we were certainly hoping for that post Labor Day that we'd get even busier.
Well, interesting that you talk about private credit like this because Bank of America actually put out a note. They said that private debt defaults are going to reach 5% by early 2024 because a lot of deals, 1/3 of deals come due in the next 2.5 years. Is that bad for private credit, though?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with those numbers. The reality is if you look at our portfolio, or the portfolio of any number of, what are arguably high quality, top tier, private credit managers, some of which are publicly traded. I think what you would see is generally portfolios have held up extremely well. So, I think that the prediction that default rates would reach 5% is not supported by what we're seeing today. Now that doesn't mean that it won't play out, but I would say that just because there's a maturity wall doesn't necessarily mean that those companies are going to ultimately default. I mean, I think what you may very well see, and you're already seeing it today, is that a lot of those companies are going back to their lenders and saying, look, this is a good business, it has strong cash flow, it's performed well, and we need to extend. And frankly, the reality is that to the extent that the businesses have performed, the odds are very good that they can work something out with their lenders and extend the maturity. So I wouldn't necessarily equate maturities to defaults because, as a direct lender, as a private credit lender, we have the ability to sit down with a company and if it's private equity owned with the private equity or the owner and work out the dynamics if in fact those need to be done. Now, it's a totally different story if the company is performing poorly or underperforming or is otherwise not able to make its payments. But I would not attribute just maturity to necessarily creating that problem. And certainly we are not seeing evidence of that today. So,
right.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Ken, right. Defaults can tell one story, and you're saying you're not necessarily seeing that. But in terms of rewriting terms and working with your borrowers, are you doing a lot more of that in this environment?
Frankly, not right now. I would tell you that our portfolio today, so we have investments in over 500 U.S. mid-market companies in areas like healthcare and software and business services. These are all backed or owned by private equity investment firms, which is largely the case for many of our peers. And I think, I've certainly had an opportunity to talk to my peers here in Greenwich Economic Forum. A number of them are here. Mm-hmm. We trade notes, and I can tell you that our portfolios overall are holding up quite well. So, our quote unquote workout person is frankly not that busy, surprisingly, I think to some. And our new deal people, the folks that are underwriting new transactions are actually quite busy. In fact, we had we had a record quarter for a third quarter last quarter. And, to the extent that, we do get some clarity regarding the dynamics in and around interest rates and maybe a bit more certainty regarding potential increases in interest rates and inflation, I think we could very well find ourselves in a relatively soft landing. And if we do, I think we'll see M&A activity and transaction activity pick up, right? Because, it's really, the markets are really waiting for some stability regarding rates. So I'm not, I would say in what obviously has been a tough day in the markets, I would say what you'll hear from me is that, there's a lot of liquidity in private credit. Institutional investors are allocating significantly to the space. Yields, obviously, conditions are quite attractive right now, and we're busy. So, I hate to be the positive story here, but I will say. We're busy and institutions are allocating for sure.
Well, Roman Bostic just said, Carol, you're the optimist always and all of this stuff. I do see the glass half full, but I want to make sure I'm eyes wide open. So I do wonder where you are seeing any cracks, because I do wonder in this higher rate environment, and we are going to be higher for longer, there's going to be some problems. We know that. So where are you seeing cracks?
No, absolutely. And I would say that, in many respects, this is the kind of period where the lenders that maybe were a bit more aggressive and looked really good, and getting higher returns, but maybe taking on more risk, I think those dynamics are coming home to roost. But I would say overall, yes. And I would say that where we see cracks, if you will, and there, certainly in our portfolio, there are not many, but where we see them, they're very episodic. And they're not tied to a broad, pullback in economic conditions. So, for example, a deal that was done a year ago where, they embarked upon an acquisition strategy and those acquisitions did not play out as expected, or where there was a